A lot of learners entering college, their lives are hybrid, as one source told me. They are used to online and technology being blended into everything that they do. And there's something really alluring about having flexibility and control to say, I want this course in person and I want this other one online.
Today, we're diving into the radical transformation of online education from pandemic necessity to strategic imperative. Joining me is Taylor Swaak, senior reporter at the Chronicle of Higher Education, whose article out this week, The Online Overhaul, tracks this seismic shift in the higher education landscape. Taylor's recent analysis reveals how institutions nationwide are scrambling to adapt, some successfully, others not so much. Taylor, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for your great reporting. Your article talks about how online education adoption jumped ahead by like 5 to 7 years during the pandemic, accelerating a trend that was already going on. So, based on your coverage, what patterns have emerged regarding which institutions appear better prepared for these changes versus those who are still clinging on to the Zoom room approach?
Yeah, so while there's no list of colleges, I would say, that are doing online well and those that are maybe still tackling cases of courses that are being taught in what feels like that COVID era emergency learning posture, there are certainly some commonalities among institutions that do feel like they have a handle on this and are scaling up successfully. A few of the key things that really came up in my reporting is, those that are establishing work groups and engaging faculty in conversations about what growing online could look like and getting that faculty buy-in. It's colleges that are prioritizing professional development of faculty who teach online and making sure that they have the supports that they need to do that job well. It's colleges that are cognizant of the investments, not just in the courses themselves, but in the wraparound supports, whether that's advising, IT support, et cetera, to provide online. Conversely, I think the colleges that are perhaps more at risk of making slower strides toward this are ones who have maybe not done these things. And especially in cases where colleges are largely decentralized, where academic departments, colleges may be kind of doing their own thing, and there's not a shared expectation or understanding about what scaling online successfully looks like. I think those are the ones that are continuing to have more challenges.
And there are lots of different flavors out there, especially these large institutions that are decentralized. And they also have a lot of infrastructure in place. And with the cost of higher education being under a microscope today, I wanted to ask you about, you documented that traditional students, those on campus students, also want this on demand flexibility, but they are living in on campus housing and they're paying maybe thousands of dollars for that per semester. So, from your reporting, what trends or underlying factors might explain this contradiction? Because I can imagine that there's this push and pull between providing that flexibility and the needs of the institution to maintain the physical plant.
Absolutely. And one of the sources I spoke with actually made a joke to me that he's sure that parents who are in a position to pay for room and board love when their kids who are living on campus take courses online. I think there's a couple of things to say here to your point. By and large, what I found, and I think it's important to note here, is that growing interest in online doesn't necessarily signal a lacking or dying interest in in-person learning. Colleges I spoke with were really clear in saying that they have many students who still value that in-person experience, the face-to-face interactions, the social opportunities that being on campus provide. But we're also in a world now where a lot of learners entering college, their lives are hybrid, as one source told me. They are used to online and technology being blended into everything that they do. And there's something really alluring about having flexibility and control to say, I want this course in person and I want this other one online. At a broader level, my colleagues have reported in the past about what feels like a power shift in higher ed. And I think that this kind of falls under that umbrella where we're seeing students who are, at the end of the day, customers increasingly having the leverage to demand what they want from their educational experience. And I think, especially as we continue to hear about the pressures that colleges are facing from an enrollment perspective, many colleges at least, not all, if colleges want to retain and attract new learners, there's this growing realization that they need to meet learners where they're at.
You're reminding me of when I was a freshman at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. It's where I'm wearing my sweater. I worked in their distance education program, which is what it was called back then. And it was via satellite video because they weren't using online learning or calling it that. And that was really to meet students where they were. They had students at sites for IBM located all over the country who are learning about human computer interaction and electrical engineering. And they were delivering those courses via satellite video to
Mhm.
conference rooms to meet those students where they are. Now, yes, I was in some of those courses later on in my career as a student. And yes, from my fraternity dorm room, I did call into one of those classes on the telephone to ask questions, watching it on my web browser. So I was one of those students for a couple of classes as an undergraduate. But it was really designed to meet those students that needed that education, professionally geared students working in industry to do that. And so much has changed since then. Going back to your reporting, I'm particularly intrigued. You talked a lot about community college districts and how to meet learners where they are and how they need education. There is this urgency among community colleges to adapt. And even those with large physical footprints, community colleges have campuses all over the region they represent, trying to make it easy for students to attend those campuses. So, what have you observed about how these institutions are approaching the challenge of adapting to meet the needs of learners with online programs?
We are definitely seeing urgency and interest. I want to make sure this is being framed in a positive way as well, because from our sources and what we're seeing in the data, community colleges are leading in many cases in their intentionality to adapt quickly to serve their learners. There are a few reasons for this. Community colleges historically serve many adult learners, many who are working, many for whom flexibility is critical to work toward their degree. It's also inherently part of a lot of the community college mission to, again, as we were saying before, meet learners where they're at, prepare them for the workforce, et cetera. And so in a lot of ways, it makes sense why we are seeing community colleges especially feel a need to respond. We actually documented this in data as well, which is really cool. In an analysis of the Chronicle's jobs board, we found that nearly 42% of the online related jobs posted by public two-year colleges in the last 8 years were placed just in 2023 and 2024 alone. And we know public 2 years, many community colleges fall into that category. And so we're definitely seeing investment. I think it's tricky. Community colleges, like any category of institution, are not a monolith. I know with a few that I spoke with, one of them, for example, wasn't adding too much additional to the budget because they were reskilling and reassigning existing faculty, for example, to teach online. And maybe there was a little bit in the budget to build up the support staff. The question about physical spaces is a really interesting one. It's one that unfortunately I didn't get to cover, really touch on too much in the reporting itself. So I'm not sure if I'm in a position to speak too authoritatively on that point, but I'm sure that those questions are the types of questions that folks are asking of how do you invest meaningfully and sufficiently in both formats at a time where cash isn't necessarily flowing. I'm sure that these are conversations that folks are having.
I think industry would also tell you that investing in commercial real estate right now is risky, given the nature of work. And with the nature of education, of course, campus life is a big part of institutions and what they offer. Living on campus, particularly for those so-called traditional age students, that is a part of it. But let's stick with finances for a second. I've worked for an OPM, and we've talked about OPMs many times on this podcast with leaders from industry and reporters. You've noted in your reporting a very interesting trend that universities are sunsetting their relationships with OPMs after they've developed an internal capability. You see this happening, for example, with Arizona State University, where they brought some great internal capabilities in house and it's kind of moved on from their OPM relationships. You've also documented that high quality education can be costly. And these OPMs are leveraging a lot of funding when they come to work with an institution. So letting go of that and moving to a place where you're delivering that online education and paying for all the mechanisms to do that. Which institutions have you seen successfully bring these capabilities in-house? What approaches are they taking to ensure that they're sort of taking the training wheels off and then the bike is moving smoothly and they're not hitting any bumps in the road, to follow the metaphor?
Yeah, for sure. I will say off the bat that there is still great need for a lot of colleges for OPMs. I feel like what we're observing is a range, right? We're seeing some that are pursuing the do this work in-house from the get-go now. There are some that currently or have worked with OPMs that aren't immediately severing the partnership and making a clean break, but they're thinking about elements that they want to bring in-house and shifting those operations bit by bit. There are others that are still fully in their partnership. So there's definitely, I think, some nuance here. And from my reporting, the ones that have been able to start moving things in house, a big question is, do you have the expertise on campus who can assist with market research, with IT support, with instructional design? And especially if you don't, a lot of it does come down to buy-in and capital, frankly. Do you, one, have support from leadership who is willing to allocate strategic investment funds or pony up money in the budget to hire and or upskill faculty? Do you even have a strategic investment fund at any room in the budget to do any of these things? And for many colleges, especially if we're talking about smaller colleges, that's why experts I've talked to say that they don't think OPMs are necessarily going away anytime soon, because there are going to be categories of institutions where, given the current financial environment for many of them and just what it takes to scale quickly, where that is really the only option. You either get in the game and you have a partner, you don't get in the game at all. And I think we're increasingly seeing colleges recognize that the latter isn't really an option. For the ones that are transitioning, I definitely feel like, at least for my reporting itself, I did speak with a few institutions that want to eventually build that capacity. But again, it's not a clean break. It's recognizing that it takes a lot of resources. For example, we hire 2 instructional designers this year, but we're going to try to budget to add another 2 next year. And hopefully at that point, we reach a point where that can be something that we own in-house. Or investing funds in this kind of larger educational effort to teach faculty how to do these things, in the hopes that they will learn how to do it themselves and will no longer need that external support. I think gradual is key in a lot of places, and recognizing that it's not necessarily going to be a one day we have this external partner that we lean very heavily on and the next we don't. It's, can we put in some resources bit by bit, teach people how to fish is a, instead of giving them a fish, is a metaphor that one source told me. And so I think that's how we're seeing a lot of institutions that maybe do not have the financial capability to do everything in-house from day one to kind of slowly start to get there.
Thinking about what is necessary to do that for an institution takes the wherewithal to see what is successful
Mhm.
and be able to look at models out there of successful programs. But it brings in this sort of double edged sword where, to use another metaphor, there is this sort of field of dreams mentality. Well, what can we do to differentiate ourselves? And a faculty member says, well, I'd like a program in translational surface engineering. And I think we should put that out online because I can do that online. And so they're trying to differentiate from similar looking programs by specializing, but that could be challenging when it's not connected to market demand. So, from your reporting, how are institutions going about evaluating that market demand when launching maybe a niche program to ensure that they're actually going to get sufficient enrollment to keep the thing going. OPMs, we know, do a lot of research around which programs they're going to launch because they understand there's market demand and they use all kinds of data sources to do that. How are institutions doing that? The same way? Differently?
Yeah, I will say I did not get a sense, at least among the sources that I spoke to in reporting for this, that people are just throwing things at the wall and seeing what will stick. It's not necessarily someone saying, let's do a program on X because why the heck not, guys? Like, let's go for it. It definitely does feel like there is intentionality behind those decisions. So, on top of market research, some of which colleges do partner with external entities to conduct, some they can do themselves. They're doing market research. They're seeing the kinds of fields that prospective students are interested in, especially if you're a community college or a college that serves a lot of local learners. You're analyzing workforce needs, you're engaging with local employers. What are the kinds of skills that students that are soon entering the workforce need to have to work for you? They're also looking at their own wait lists to see what are the courses or topics that are just always filling up really quickly that students are trying to access in the online format. Is there another thread to pull on here? Should we be adding something additional? And so it definitely feels like there is data and research going behind this, at least from the sources that I spoke with.
That's good to hear because I think that one of the things we're seeing is a shift in the demand from degrees in particular, and then also short form credentials and micro credentials to be upskilling and reskilling degrees, that to spend the time and effort to do that, there has to be a sufficient return on investment. Now, as somebody who studied rhetoric for their PhD, there are a lot of things I could do with that, but I can imagine looking at that from a market research standpoint, you go, how many rhetoricians does the country actually need? Well, none. Okay. So what is the value of this degree? So it is a balance. Is really, really interesting. I want to ask you, just from your conversations, you did a tremendous amount of reporting for this article, very well written and well sourced and documented. And you talked about changing staffing models and the hiring of faculty. I'm curious if artificial intelligence came up in those conversations and how it might be impacting the online programs being developed, how instructors' roles might evolve around that. Did AI come up in these conversations? And if so, what was the flavor of that?
It did a bit, and that's an area where I think there's certainly some room for additional follow-up. Traditionally, my beat hasn't touched too much on AI inside the classroom, but of course, we are seeing and hearing about AI tools being increasingly integrated into online courses in a couple ways. We're seeing software like courseware that's adding adaptive learning capabilities where a student's assignments or homework may shift based on how they perform on assessments to give them additional practice in areas where they might be struggling. We're seeing use of AI to engage students online in new ways. For example, there was an experimental AI tool that can turn readings and class materials into audio snippets, podcasts, essentially. There's also, of course, the reality that many students use ChatGPT on a day-to-day basis just as a resource as they go through their courses. And I will say something that did come up in conversation with some faculty members I spoke to in this piece in terms of the types of support that they feel they need to run online well. AI broadly did come up in that they recognize that it's not going away. AI tools are here to stay, and wanting more resources and guidance in many cases from their universities on how do we incorporate and handle AI use in a meaningful, responsible way. So kind of seeking out action steps and what does it look like to use AI well, or how to respond to students' use of AI. I think there's much more to flesh out in that scenario, but certainly the couple of times that AI did come up in the conversation around online education, it was recognition that it's going to be there, and interest perhaps in incorporating it into courses, but definitely wanting more of that leadership and mentorship around how to do that well.
If you'd like to hear more and you're listening to this podcast, please go check out this excellent article, The Online Overhaul, available in the show notes for this podcast and also at chronicle.com. Don't fret. You can sign up for a free account at chronicle.com to read the article and see more of Taylor's excellent reporting on the changes in online education. Taylor Swaak, senior reporter at the Chronicle of Higher Education. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So here's my take. You should check out this article for yourself, but it's clear we're not just watching an evolution in online education here. We're witnessing a complete reimagining of what higher education means. The institutions that are going to thrive aren't necessarily those with the biggest budgets, but those willing to fundamentally question their delivery models and their student experience. Technology isn't the solution, it's merely the enabler for institutions brave enough to break from some traditional norms and truly meet students where they are, whether they're working professionals, whether they're adult learners in different time zones. Just as computers and the internet were technologies before that enabled institutions to break from tradition, the future belongs to those who view digital transformation not as a project, but as a mindset and a way to democratize higher education globally.